All right, so there's our Psalm 121. And just to give you a very quick recap, we began this entire study with Psalm 121, kind of looking at the question of how can I share my faith without taking it or relating the faith out of context. How can I let people know that just because you become a Christian, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a life filled with a bowl of cherries, and that somehow you are guaranteed to not be called home. We also learned that the comfort in all of this, or hopefully the de-stressor in all of this, is that the time of our life is set by God. The years, the days, the months, the minutes, the seconds. And so that should take away a little bit of the panic about being too much of a germaphobe. You can be a germaphobe if you don't want to get someone else sick, but as far as the stress of, oh my gosh, is this the thing that's going to take me out of this life? That's in the Lord's hands. So we learned that there is no such thing as an untimely death for a Christian. Someone asked me by an email over the week, is there such a thing as an untimely death for a non-Christian? No, that statement about the length of a person's life gets extended to all souls on this planet. Okay, then we had the comment of, well, I'm not afraid of dying, I'm afraid of the process. And that's when we got in the last week and a half, kind of looking at anxiety. And anxiety leads to fear. Fear leads to thinking. Thinking leads to emotions, and emotions leads to behavior. And we took a look last week at if we throw a wrench in that cycle anywhere, throw a wrench in the gears in any of that part of that cycle, we're going to break it apart and be able to get ourselves a little bit more to a normal state so that we can actually think rationally. Think rationally, remembering that the Lord is control of our life and He has promised to be with us and not to forsake us through that whole process. So we kind of left off with leaving you with the COVID circles last week, and we were digging back into the rest of our psalm and moving from the fear zone to the learning zone to the growth zone. And it was basically asking you, where are you at now? Where would you like to be? And how are you going to get there? And I hope that you spent some time this week kind of taking a look at that over your tea in the morning or in the afternoon. It's not like you've had a lack of time to be able to study this a little bit. So today we are hopefully going to wrap up. We will wrap up Psalm 121. And where we left off last week was this behold statement in verse 4. And behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. So we saw that this behold, hene, in Greek it's Allah, can also be translated as indeed or surely or yes. And we had the question, what does this little verb communicate? And it basically just communicates to us, hey, slow down, pay attention, and listen up. This is important stuff that's going to be coming, but it's also conveying confidence by the Holy Spirit through the psalmist to whoever reads it, and especially for the one who wrote it. It conveys the confidence that the psalmist has in the Lord. So now this should be new territory, this slide. God's eyes and countenance rests upon you every moment of your life. Based upon this word, behold, God's eyes and countenance rest upon you every moment of your life. It is not an idle watching, but a very active one. He is not a God who has withdrawn himself from his creation. He is not the God of the Masons that wound this watch up, this clock up, and then removed himself to some distant heaven to see how the whole thing plays out as he rouses himself from his slumber and sleep every now and then just to see how his earth is doing. No, on the contrary, he's a very active and watchful God. So with this, God clears away obstructions to your process, to your life, to your vocation, and he supplies you constantly with strength for your pilgrimage. So we saw in a previous verse the negative prohibition all, and that's an immediate prohibition. Here we have the second of two Hebrew prohibitions, no's or not's or neither's or neither's, whether you like potato or potato. This is lo. Behold, he who keeps Israel will not slumber nor sleep. This negative prohibition is more of a permanent prohibition. The prior one was immediate. This is stronger. This is stop doing it. That's immediate prohibition. All. Stop doing it now and forevermore. Don't ever do it again. In other words, never do it. Stop. That would be low. And we have to be careful with low. We can't always, in every single case, say that when we come across the negative low, that it always and forever means never. You also need to take it within the context of greater scripture. But here you could easily translate this, behold, he who keeps Israel will never slumber nor sleep. So generally when I come across low, I tend to kind of substitute the word never. It's a long-term prohibition. It's just not going to happen. So, but you have to also I'm going to qualify it again. You have to take it within the context of the rest of scripture. So that should be some comfort for us, seeing these little words that we've been digging into here. And I just was thinking as I was walking up to the office or up to church here this morning, that just to give you an insight, all of this, what I've been giving myself the rap of this nerdy and geeky language stuff. This is the kind of word study that goes into putting a sermon together for you, or in this case, a Bible class. But these are the kind of nuances that one picks up by studying the original language. And this is one of the reasons why for our church body, it's still very important that pastors graduate or are assigned out of our Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary with a good working knowledge of the original languages, so that you can actually stand up in the pulpit and say, thus saith the Lord. And the reason I can say, thus saith the Lord, is because I just translated the Lord's words for myself, and I saw what he said. So not everyone is a language scholar, and most pastors tend to gravitate to either Greek or Hebrew as their favorite of the two. But these are the nuances that you get when you study a language. And I'm going to try to share some of that with you at the end of this class that I think you should be able to work through for yourself at home. Okay, so I have a question for you based on this negative prohibition. What is the comfort of knowing that God neither slumbers nor sleeps? He is not Baal. So what's the comfort for you that you know that your God neither slumbers nor sleeps? Anyone want to come out of their morning slumber and maybe postulate an answer to a relatively simple question?
Well, Pastor, it's Murray. The thing obviously is that if God is never slumbers nor sleeps, then nothing ever escapes his attention, and we are never outside of his gaze. So therefore, we're always protected.
Thank you very much, Murray. That's absolutely correct. I mean, knowing that I am under God's gaze is a really good thing. It's a terrifying thing when I have sinned and I have forgotten that I am under his constant gaze. But even that, I'm covered in the blood of Christ, and I'm forgiven for that. So thank you, Murray. That's a very good answer. That's just what I was looking for. So, all right, I will move us along here. And now we're getting into the portion of where we're going to summarize this verse 3 and 4. This Lord helper, your protector, will not rest. This is constant, it is ongoing, and he will not allow you to fall into calamity. And the reason that I have that picture of a driver on the mountains keep it from being too monotonous, but what do you find when you're on a long road trip and you did not get a good night's sleep the night before? You tend to start getting a little drowsy. And that gets dangerous, and you need to pull over and take a break. This is not our God. He does not get drowsy as he's going through timelessness and observing our time. So just a little observation there. So there's our summary for 3 and 4. We're getting into verse 5 now. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand. So we're going to take a look at the idea of the Lord is your shade. We're going to kind of focus on that for just a second here. So in the desert, obviously, shade is protection. The Lord walks with his own on the way and lends them his protection. The picture here, the Lord is your shade, suggests that there are dangers threatening the godly pilgrim in their walk through this life. So against these dangers, the Lord keeps you safe and he keeps you from harm. This is taken from Psalm 17, verse 8. Keep me as the apple of your eye, hide me in the shadow of your wings. And we're going to see some really cool secret place phraseology again when we take a look at our next psalm in Psalm 27. This is a constant refrain of our God, keeping you in the shadow of his wings, taking you to a high place that cannot be touched by evil. Being kept in the secret place of God's favor, but also God's protection. So this idea of your right hand, the Lord is your shade on your right hand. Right hand in the Bible and at the right hand of God, which is where Jesus ascended to, is this idea of favor and strength. In the case of when we say he's my right hand man, Joseph, or Jacob was Pharaoh's right-hand man. He basically ran the country. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that you have almost virtually the same power and authority as the one who is in charge. So it's this idea of favor and strength. Benjamin, which in Hebrew would be Benjamin, Ben just means son, and Yamin is right hand. So Benjamin just means son of my right hand. So there you go, Ben Cheslock. You have a very illustrious name that you were given there. Clearly a name showing special favor and position as Jacob's youngest son. So if we get into verse 6, the sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. This was kind of an interesting part of the study, and by interesting, we're going to put that in quotes, but there is definitely some truth here for the Christians. In the Orient, and what we mean by the Orient is in the East and in the Middle East, the sun and the moon were believed to wield a destructive influence upon the traveler. Physically, you could get sunstroke from the sun, and there was felt to be a moonstroke from the moon, and I'll answer that in just a second. But this verse calls to mind examples of various dangers which God's pilgrims were exposed. Just the Lord here is basically saying he guards against them all. Nothing shall bring his own any real harm on their way before they have reached their destination. And just very practically speaking, the peoples of the East and the Middle East were probably onto something, because if you think about it, the sun saps your strength and the moon can sap your courage. But the point of all of this, that's just practically and humanly speaking, the point of all of this, the sun will not strike you by day nor the moon by night. This verse is an illustration of what grammarians call a merismus. And a merismus is really nothing more than two extremes placed side by side as a way to illustrate or denote or communicate a totality. So from the sun, it's blazing, and the moon by night, from day to night, from sun to moon, they will not strike you. You are not outside of God's protection. So in other words, God is saying to you, I've got your back. I've got this for you. So, okay. On to verse 7. The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. So, we know as a Christian, life is not a bowl of cherries. In fact, when you become a Christian, it probably becomes even more of a challenge to live in this life. And that's just part of the life of sanctification. Though we must endure various troubles, the Lord preserves you against all that would do you any real harm. So just a reminder here at this point that no one can die before the time set by God's counsel. There's no such thing as an untimely death for a Christian. And that should be a great comfort and a great de-stressor for all of us. If we roll down into verse 8, the Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forevermore. And we have here a couple of comments. Christians today use both the narrow and the wider applications of the terms coming and going in the psalm. In the narrow application, the psalm is an excellent prayer for travelers. In its wider application, it might sound familiar to you because we use verse 8 in the very traditional baptism liturgy as an expression of the Lord's care for the newly baptized child throughout his or her life. I think early on in my ministry here, I received the question, and I get it every now and then, how long does your baptismal grace last? And the Bible does not answer that question except by encouraging parents to raise up their children in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. So I have no way of venturing a answer to that question. I just wouldn't take I wouldn't take the baptism and the saving grace that is brought along with that baptism for granted. Just make sure that at every opportunity you have a chance to be able to share the word of God and instruction of the Lord with your children. So in verses 5 through 8, question for you. In verses 5 through 8, the psalmist presents several ways in which God keeps his children. So which of these images gives you the greatest comfort? Now, if you take a look at your worship folder, if you go back to your handout and you take a look at those statements there in verses 5 through 8. And I came up with 3, if that'll help you, but which of those do you find to be the greatest comfort for you in those images that the Lord lays out for you there? And maybe why? Rather than just answering, maybe why does it give you such comfort? Giving you some time to think about it. Well, you've got 3 of them. Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say, Pastor Bev, that I like the idea of just very simply God watching over you. It's like, another almighty pair of eyes with you wherever you go. So that's extremely comforting, because sometimes we can be kind of, I'll speak for myself, blundering a little bit blindly, right?
Yeah. Notice too, Beth, that in all of you, that's your center verse in this psalm. The Lord is your keeper, or the Lord watches over you. The Lord is the one who keeps you, protects you. So that's the center idea to the psalm. And remember, we said that if you take a psalm and you divide it, go to the center, that center idea is usually almost always, I can't think of an exception to it, but maybe there's one exception. Right. That's the central thought of what the psalm is about. And that's just the style of Hebrew poetry that we have here. So, good.
Right. Good.
Anyone else before we kind of dig into it?
Yeah, so Pastor, just one thing about that. In verse 5, the Lord is your keeper. Your shade at your right hand. I'm looking at the Lutheran Study Bible. It does kind of gives this image of sitting in the sun at noon, but like under the shade of a tree, kind of a thing. How much God actually is just sort of minimizing the impact of what's coming in on you. We don't see that, but we're the net recipients of a reduced pressure and threat and everything else like that, because he is there providing shade from all of these other activities at the same time.
Yeah, thank you for that, Murray. I was looking for a graphic that I found years and years ago where Jesus and I've even now forgotten the passage that it's based upon. Um, the slings and arrows of this world that are directed at the Christian. And the graphic was of the as you looked at it, the Christian you could see standing there, and then you're looking at the back of Jesus, and Jesus' back is just filled with arrows and axes and knives. And he's taken the blow of all of that for his dear child. So it's kind of a cool graphic. Plus, I like the style of the artist. So thanks for that, Murray. Good observation.
Pastor, one other Judy here.
Yes, Judy.
I just noticed that this whole concept of God watching over us is woven throughout our prayers. I mean, Luther's morning prayer, we said that he's kept us from all harm and danger, and we put our lives into his hands morning and night. So it's just, everything ties together so beautifully.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a common refrain in the scriptures, and sometimes, you know, we almost need like a COVID Bible class just to slow us down and have it kind of drilled into our heads, so that we, oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, the Lord has promised that he's always going to watch over me and protect me. I don't know why am I getting my hair on fire about this? But you know, we are frail creatures and needy creatures and vexed by the world, and sometimes we let that take over our thinking, right? Thinking leads to emotions, and emotions leads to behavior, and that's a cycle that we need to try to break. So if it's not Christ-centered. I came up with 3 that I'll share with you, and anyone who has an observation, please feel free to jump in here. But I like the idea of the one who keeps. It's a participle, but it's also, we don't normally translate that way. We don't speak that way. The one who keeps. We just translate it as a keeper. Is like a bodyguard or watchman whose sole concern is the safety of the person he is keeping watch over. While we are busy focusing on providing for our families and serving our neighbors, God is busy watching our enemies and protecting and guarding us. So it's a great comforting thought there. So as we go about our work. God shades us from the sun and the moon. This was Murray's observation. The sun's heat can be deadly, and we know, as we know on many summer days. But the ancient people also may have feared the eerie light of the moon. And we know from a couple of sources that I came across, kind of interesting urban legend stories. But at the very least, the truth is that the sun saps your strength and the moon can sap your courage. And then lastly, the third idea out of 5 through 8, the Lord will keep your going out and your coming in. Whether we are leaving our house for school, work, or other business, God is guarding us. And when we return home at the end of the day, God is there. So, okay, then we have our last verse here. The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. That's verse 7. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forevermore. And just the reason I have those words keep kind of highlighted is just a review question. Again, an imperfect Hebrew verb without the Hebrew vav always expresses incomplete action. So my question for you, just as a review question, is in verses 7 and 8, what insight does expressing incomplete action tell you about the Lord? And the incomplete action here would be the keeping. So what insight does that grammar of that word tell you? What truth does it convey to you? We had this once before.
Hi, it's Marion. The keeping, it's continuous. It doesn't stop.
Thank you, Marion. Yes. If it's a verb, imperfect verb, and it has incomplete action, it means that it just keeps going on. And I probably got a little bit outrageous here in my answer for you. But just to drive the point home, the Lord will keep you and continue to 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 keep you and ad infinitum from all evil, from all evil, from all evil. He will keep your life. He will keep your life. He will continue to keep your life. He will keep your going out and your coming in, and he will continue to keep your and watch over and protect your going out and your coming in. So I have not discovered a way, short of you buying maybe a language program for a person who does not know Hebrew to discover these. But I think I have a way to at least you can get some nuance or sense out of it that we're going to go through at the end. But you can always call up your pastors and say, listen, can you translate this verse in the Greek or the Hebrew for you? So I'm going to focus us now in verse 8 on your going out and your coming in. And in what ways might we understand this phrase, you're going out and you're coming in? How might we understand that?
Pastor, it's Rose.
Yes, Rose.
Hi. I think that lots of times we don't know where we're going and we don't know what we're walking into. And we may sometimes, we think we know everything and we don't know what's going on, but the Lord always does. So whether we feel a bit lost or unsure, we know the Lord's with us.
Good. Thank you. That gives us a good start here. On the one hand, now we're on basically Pentecost today. So it would be, what would that be? Easter 7? Easter 8, I guess, but it's not Easter 8, it's Pentecost. But in an Easter 4 sermon, we had a sermon based on John chapter 10. And in verse 9, there was, I am the gate, whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and they will go out and find pasture. Now, in the context, that phrase in the context of that John's Gospel chapter 10 there is that you will have no hindrance. In other words, if you have no hindrance, what this good shepherd is actually giving you is real freedom in the best possible sense. So that would be one idea. If you have a really good memory for sermons more than just a week ago, you might have recalled that Easter 4 sermon and that phrase, that statement made by Jesus. Here we have some additional thoughts. In God's hands then rests our last going out and our coming in, our going out from this time or the land of the living and our entry into eternity. That might be one thought that comes to mind. The thought that was probably in the mind of the Hebrew writer in the context of his culture and his lifestyle was the Hebrew going out and coming in reflects the perspective of one who has already arrived at the temple for one of the 3 mandatory annual festivals. For example, Passover or the Feast of Tabernacles. The Lord will protect the pilgrim from the time they leave the temple until they return again, which is kind of a cool idea. So from the time that you leave the temple to return back to your home, through your pilgrimage, through carrying out your vocation, until it's time for you to pack up the family again and head back to Jerusalem for one of the 3 mandatory festivals, the Lord's going to watch over you through that entire process. It's not just while you're physically in the holy city of Zion for that festival. So kind of a cool idea there in the context of the verse, or of the culture. Someone had a comment?
Yeah, it's Fran.
Hi,
Just
Fran.
before we move off of this, I am going to be a little bit of the devil's advocate, if you don't mind, for a second. Isn't this interpretation in that language, especially that imagery you just put of the toing and coming from temple?
Yeah.
Very similar to the narrative that we're hearing about people who are arguing that there's no need for me to be concerned about gathering in large groups or gathering in a church. Because if I'm going to a holy place and coming from a holy place, first of all, I'm completely protected. We've heard that.
Yeah.
And then we're hearing this, secondly, for those who aren't really paying close attention, I guess, they could also use the narrative, and if my time of death is already determined, then so is yours. And so anything that I do has no effect on that. Consequently, why am I concerned about affecting you with a virus? Because it will be what it will be according to the Bible. How does that narrative fit into what we're talking about here?
Sure, that's a good application, and very good question. So we have the pastor in the South, don't know what denomination, doesn't matter. He said that I will not shut down my worship services. I will allow my people to come. We will gather as God's people because we are all covered in the blood of Christ, and that will protect us from all harm. He has absolutely no biblical grounds for extrapolating that statement to that point. He is covered in the blood of Christ, and that blood of Christ covering there is referring primarily to his spiritual welfare, as we've been stressing, not necessarily his physical welfare. And that man has since contracted COVID, and his funeral has probably been 2 or 3 weeks past now since as a result. So if we know the time of our life, and I know the time of your life has been set, what difference does it make then whether we gather together for worship or not? We'll just trust that God is going to keep us safe. And if he doesn't keep us safe, meaning we're going to die from COVID, well, that's just so be it. That's the Lord's will. There's a couple of things that enter in here. First, there would be the matter of the fourth commandment. And the fourth commandment, honor your father and your mother, that it may go well with you and you may have long life on the earth. Under the fourth commandment, we also are taught to have respect for the authority that God has placed over us. We know from Romans 13 that God is the one who has established the government that each particular nation enjoys, or maybe doesn't enjoy for whatever his divine purpose is, maybe thinking in North Korea. But out of respect for the government, respecting the government is respecting God. Disrespecting the government is disrespecting God, because he's the one who established it. So I don't want to disrespect God. So if my government is telling me that I need to keep a social distance of 2 meters or 6 feet, that my government is telling me that I'm not supposed to have more than 5 people in the building to be able to live stream worship to you, if the government is telling me that we can have no more than 10 people assembled for a funeral, no matter how dearly loved that Christian was, Shirley Days and Gaddy, including the outdoor committal at Beechwood, I'm going to adhere to that request of my government because I love my Jesus. And so I'm going to show love for my government. There's also an eighth commandment issue here, though, too, as well. And that is that I'm going to I'm going to watch over my neighbor. You should not not misuse the name of the Lord. What am I thinking? Eighth commandment is basically telling us to watch out for the goodwill and the good health of our neighbor. I don't know if my neighbor, meaning my Christian brother or sister, when their time of grace is up, okay? But let's say that Pastor Goetzinger is carrying around the coronavirus inside of him, but he's not showing any of the symptoms and he's not falling from the ill effects of it. So I'm asymptomatic, right? But I am infecting people left and right as I come into contact with them, right? I would feel awful out of love for my brother and sister that I have put them through such a excruciatingly, well, what sounds to be an excruciatingly uncomfortable super flu. It's more than a super flu, but I mean the symptoms of really bad cold or really bad flu, right? And I think also in this, we have Paul teaching us in Corinthians related to that eighth commandment, well, all of them. If Christ has set you free, you are free indeed. This whole idea of Christian freedom. And the whole idea of Christian freedom has on the flip side of it that if what I am going to do is offensive to someone else because of a weak conscience or a weak faith, then in my Christian freedom, I will choose not to do something that my Christian freedom allows me to do, right? And I think there's an aspect of that. And what that does is that reflects the idea of what the Christian vocation then is really all about. The Christian vocation is not about me and what I want. It's about me doing what I can to serve you to the best of my ability and giving you what you need and what you want, right? That's the Christian vocation. So it's not inwardly focused. It's serving my brother and sister. And if it serves my brother and sister directly as Christians, and it serves the society that I'm living in better for me to obey the 5-person rule for live streaming worship, to obey the request of the government to not assemble for worship so that we can keep this thing under control? For what purpose? So that for our society, we don't totally blow up and incendiary bomb our healthcare system for those who really need to have heart surgeries and prostate surgeries and whatever else, hip replacements or whatever else, that so we don't kill our healthcare system. So as you were asking the question, Fran, I had a whole lot of answers in my head that were kind of spinning around, and I hope I got most of them out, but that would be like my knee-jerk reaction to you. It's extremely irresponsible of, I was going to say American pastors, but pastors of any Christian denomination anywhere in the world, that's taking the scripture out of context and relating a false contextual message based upon the Bible to his followers and to the world at large. And I think the world at large, especially Christians who have some sort of Christian education, probably knew that this man was misspeaking and he was misrepresenting the Christian faith. And we just kind of shook our heads and went, oh, here we go again. It does not do Christ any glory for pastors to be talking like that. Yes, he was covered in the blood of Christ. Absolutely. But we're talking spiritual. That does not guarantee that he is going to be spared from the physical means that God uses to take us out of this world. And COVID is one of them. Friend, did I answer your question?
I think it's a good thing that actually this is taped. It's probably one of the most thorough and succinct and covering all the points answers we've heard yet, Pastor. Yes, thank you.
Okay, good.
Pastor, it's Jim.
Yes, Jim.
I interpret that as to be no different than Christ's temptation. When he says, do not put the Lord your God to the test. I mean, God knows you're going to do stupid things. And he knows maybe you're going to expose yourself to coronavirus because of your stupid actions.
Yeah.
And you're going to have, I don't want to use the word untimely, but you're going to die because of it. So He knows when you're going to die.
Yeah.
But he's a means of grace, and he knows you're going to be stupid, and that stupidness is going to cause your death.
Yeah.
So I interpret that, Pastor, as challenging the authority of God.
Okay, I mean, I didn't want to do this, but I have to chime in just a little bit, Pastor. My apologies. I mean, I understand this and reasonable caution and all of that sort of stuff, but I mean, we do need to be aware as well that we need to maintain our faith community, and we do have a responsibility as a congregation to support each other. If if I look at this thing about, we've been called as well to support each other. If we are prevented from getting together as a community in general at an unreasonable degree, then we need to legitimately question whether that is in fact supporting God's will as well, because we can have people who will make a point that due to perceptions of risk one way or another, there will always be a case made for us not to get together. If we have an extended period where the government says, as we've seen in some cases, oh, just don't get together, you can't get together to worship, and you look beyond the reasonableness of this, putting 5 people in all of St. Paul, given the size of that building and our ability to spread ourselves around, when we put 50 people inside of a liquor store that is no bigger than that, I mean, we have to look at this as to whether or not that is in fact God-pleasing as well, because we run the risk of having our religious freedom and our ability to worship as Christians compromised by things. There has to be some element of sensible approach to this. So while we abide by what the government has to say and we take reasonable precautions, we should not simply allow ourselves to be bowed over to just blind obedience to a government in all cases without critical reflection on whether or not that makes sense.
Yeah, and then exercise our right as citizens to be able to push back on whether we think that this is a fair and equitable exercise of safety in the favor of liquor stores and offending, Christian assemblies. I mean, in the meantime, we bow our head to the unfairness or the injustice or the imbalance of it, and follow the rules of our government. It's interesting, that Murray's comment just reminded me that historically, WELS presidents have not been church body leaders that have made public comment or dispensations on everything and anything that's politically going on in the environment or the culture of the world at that time. We've let the Pope and his bishops and cardinals and archbishops carry that flag. To a degree, President Harrison from the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod makes some comments, and once in a rare while, you will see President Schrader make a comment. But it's interesting that in the last, I would say, 4 or 5 weeks, the number of emails that I have received saying that I need to be saying something about this very topic that Murray was just discussing as president of WELS-Canada. If nothing else, to maybe if not the time to press it with my local mayor or my local MP, which I would probably have to ask Pastor Thompson if I could have some time off the preaching schedule to pursue that one. But historically, WELS pastors, WELS presidents have not made public statements like this. And I've been kind of thinking about this so I was thinking more importantly about being ready for you for Sunday here. But this coming week, I'm going to be giving that some thought. And what could we do to maybe push back on this size and assembly, and under what circumstances we're going to be able to get ourselves back together as a Christian community. I don't know if any of you were able to sit in on the Thursday noon, 4C's World Vision sponsored Zoomcast with Dr. Strang, who is the Chief Medical Officer of Nova Scotia and is also on the task force, the federal task force for COVID. And he was basically addressing when are churches going to be able to get back together and start worshiping again, which was a tough question for him to really address since it's a provincial matter. Alberta has already gone back to allowing places of worship to gather. They are at a size limit of 50 souls, or 1/3 of the capacity, the seating capacity of your congregation. Whatever is the least of that. You still must come to worship wearing a mask, a face covering. You still must come to worship and observe social distancing, except for those in immediate households. That is effective immediately, and I have not heard of any of our congregations in Alberta racing to that opening. Our churches in upstate New York are moving a little bit faster towards assembling for worship. Where was I? I was on that. Dr. Strang. So Dr. Strang, so he did not directly address when are we all going to be back to our normal. His overriding message to us was we are not going back to a 2019 normal as we knew it. It's not going to happen. And the only way we will be back to any sort of semblance of normal is when we actually have an active vaccine and the majority of the population, which I think, depending on what doctor you talk to, it's generally considered 70, 80% of the population has been vaccinated. And what is that vaccine going to look like? Is it going to prevent coronavirus, or is it going to be an annual thing like a flu shot that's just going to relieve the symptoms of coronavirus? We don't know. But I'll tell you, Dr. Strang, without answering the question directly, kept repeating a mantra that I think he was planting a seed as to how long it might be before we're kind of approaching some sense of normalcy. And he kept dropping the 1 to 2 year time frame. And that's because that's how long it's probably going to take to truly develop a vaccine and get it produced and get it shot into the arms of human beings all the way around the world. he did not infer that that would preclude us from gathering together again as a body of believers. And our local MP was hosting a community open forum on Friday that Pastor Sullivan was trying to get me invited to, but I never did get an invitation. And they were basically looking for feedback as to what they thought would be appropriate, size limitations and time and haste. Right now, places of worship are in phase 3 of Premier Ford's plan to get everything kind of sort of back to normal. And the last I heard, originally he was giving each phase, 3 weeks to see how the numbers were going. The last I heard, I have to verify this, so don't everybody get panicky, but the last I heard, he had upped that to 7 weeks. And that was a result of the gathering in the park over last weekend that got him a little kerfluffled. So I have to verify, but theoretically, if we're at the end of 7 weeks times 3 phases, that's another 21 weeks before churches are going to be allowed to be able to gather for worship in some way, shape, or form. Just know that Pastor Thompson and I have said, if we can hold 35 to 40, and that's the maximum of our capacity, 1/3 of our capacity, in order to be able to keep people 6 feet away or family groups 6 feet away, we'll do whatever we have to do. If we have to have 2-3 services in order to accommodate our family, our community, that's fine. That's still not the most ideal, and it's not the best. We've talked about having outdoor worship so that we can, but even that they're talking about limiting the number of families. They're going to pattern it after Quebec. Quebec has a maximum of 10 people. I don't know, what was it? It was 3 family units, 10 people, and you still have to practice social distancing. So even our shepherd, we're going to be slow in getting back to worship up there, even if we are outside and have an outdoor worship. So anyway, just a little bit on the heels of Murray's comment there. And okay, I do want to get done with Psalm 121, and I don't want to rush over this topic. So if anyone felt as though I left something unanswered on that, please feel free. But on this topic of you're going in and you're going out and you're coming in, from Deuteronomy 28, God said to Israel through Moses, referring to the Sinaitic covenant, blessed shall you be when you come in and blessed shall you be when you go out. So you're just blessed all the time. So we're kind of wrapping into our summary here. The Lord watches over our going out and our coming in over all our ways. He helps and supplies strength for our pilgrimage. He removes obstructions which hinder our course and purpose in life. He turns back perils so that we do not succumb to death before our time. And he finally leads his own out of this time to eternity. So the question I have for you then is, does the truth of this psalm partially, totally, sort of dispel your fear? And that's kind of what prompted this was, I'm not afraid of dying, I'm afraid of the process. I'm fearful of the process. So I'll leave that with you. This is a chart that you have on the back near the last printed page of your worship folder. And while I understand that there are only 2.5 people in this congregation that know how to translate and read Hebrew, and that would be Pastor Thompson, myself, and Christian Bickle is working on it. So yay, Christian, keep going, man. I understand that you don't know how to translate Hebrew, but you probably can figure out how to diagram a sentence. And if you follow with me, you'll be able to even read the English, and you should be able to glean some sort of chart like this for yourself on almost any psalm that you want to dig into. And you almost don't need to go through this extensive process to walk away with the key ideas of any given psalm. But if you're so inclined, these imperfects that we were talking about, it's in the left side of the far left column. And in English, you can start picking up the idea, I lift up my eyes, and I continue to lift up my eyes. He will keep you, and he will continue to keep you. Now, a vav consecutive imperfect with the vav is going to be translated very close. So you almost need to have pastors check the Hebrew to find out what's going on here. But you get the idea. And once you take a psalm and you kind of break it up like this, or you diagram it or chart it like this, when you get all those durative or continuous, incomplete action, continuous action, imperfects together, the point that you have at the bottom is, I continually lift up my eyes to the one who actively and continuously protects me. The Lord will continually keep you and continue to keep you and continue to keep you. So that's the benefit of kind of taking all the imperfects and stacking them up by verse and seeing what's going on there. The jussives are a little bit easier for the English reader to identify. And generally speaking, there is not another form of the Hebrew language that would be expressed in this way in English. So you're pretty safe in finding phrases like, he shall not let, or he shall let, or he shall not slumber, or whatever it is. He will not ever sleep. He will not strike you. And this is expressing a conviction on the part of the speaker. In the case of a jussive, it's for the third person. So the conviction that you get out of this on the part of the speaker, which is God, is he never rests. So he's always actively watching over you. If we move to the third column here, where I have it headed up as participle, stresses the person doing the activity. Literally in Hebrew, it would be the one who makes, or the one who protects, or and these are going to be kind of subjects of your sentence, and you should be able to identify these in English and be able to kind of get them into a chart like this. And when you do that, the characteristic of this subject, who is God in this case, that you're going to see, is that the maker of the universe is also your protector. He's also your bodyguard, right? And in addition to that, he also has those guardian angels that he has watching over his people as well. The last column in this chart that I've shared with you is, in Hebrew, it's called an infinitive construct. You know what an infinitive is. An infinitive is to do something, to laugh, to run, to play, can be formed in the infinitive form. And here, it's going to be to the going out of you, or to the coming in of you. And this is going to be a little bit easier for you to be able to identify in English as well. And when is your going out? When is your coming in? It always and forever, God is going to be watching over and protecting us as our protector. So I realize you don't know Hebrew, and I realize you don't have access to really easy Hebrew tools. Like Greek is a little bit easier. There are tools out there for people who would like to learn Greek and do a little bit of delving in. The other thing I would caution you to is that work on diagramming a sentence like this if you'll find it edifying, but also understand that a little knowledge it can be dangerous. So if you have any doubts about what it is that you're kind of diagramming here, you need to just share it with your pastors and say, listen, I realize you're swamped, but when you have the time, can you just translate this psalm for me in Hebrew and just double check my work here? But we would be happy to do that. So I don't know if that's going to help you, but that's generally what I kind of do if I'm going to preach on a psalm, or I'm going to some form of poetry. I'm kind of put a chart like this together. It's just part of the process of pulling a sermon together. So. Okay, so what I'd like you to do this week, we're going to take a look at another new psalm, Psalm 27, next Sunday. And in preparation for Psalm 27, which is going to be Christ, this was Christ my helper. We're going to be taking a look at Christ my courage. I would like you to take a look at Hebrews 11 this coming week in anticipation, preparation for next week. You can read Psalm 27 as well. That's great. But I want you to ask yourself this question: how does this chapter 11 of Hebrews help you face a crisis? And I want you to give that some thought sooner rather than later, and maybe come to class next week prepared to share some of that. So this is our final closing thought here that I'm going to leave you with from 2 Timothy 1. For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. So with that, that concludes our study of Psalm 121, and I think some pretty good conversation this morning. Have I left you with any doubts, questions, lingering thoughts that anyone wants to share in the last minute and a half that we have before we depart for worship?
Pastor, this is Evelyn.
Hi, Evelyn.
Hi, good morning. When you were mentioning that picture of having a person who basically is assaulted by the devil and his evil angels and all the attacks of the world, it reminded me of a picture that I actually posted. Mariana helped me, obviously, to be able to, it's for Christian mothers. Again, I'm not sure who the copyright is for, but I will look up that information and get that to make sure that the artist gets the credit. However, because it is originally not mine, I found it on Facebook, but it's such a beautiful visual imagery to me of the way in which a parent, because this can be taken both ways, the images of a mom, but a parent tries to shelter his or her child or children against the assault of the devil. And literally it's a picture of a mom with the word of God open to her child, and she herself is assuming some of the hits from the evil one as she shields and protects her child. And the word itself is kind of an illuminated aspect of protection that also encourages a child who clearly in the picture is unable to care for, I think it's a guy, care for himself. And I think it's a beautiful imagery, again, for mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, whoever, of how God's word does protect us, but also how we do, in fact, receive inflictions and hurts. And we do, as kind of a summary of what you've mentioned with COVID and many other things in life, we will still receive and have inflictions in our bodies and in our minds and physically, psychologically, every other way. But that doesn't change the potency of the word. It doesn't change the role that we have to continue to protect those that we can and to go back to the source of light and truth to try to empower us and equip us with what we need to withstand the devil and all of his ways and workings against us. So I would encourage you to check that out. And again, sometimes I think the adage of a picture worth 1,000 words really is just that. So I shared that, so that might be of help.
That's the picture I had in mind, other than the fact that it was Jesus and not Supermom. But thank you for sharing that. That's the idea right there that I was thinking of. So I'll try to find it.
And to be clear, this is so not even me or any Supermom or Superdad. There is no such thing. But you're exactly right. If we were to make that Christ instead of us, I think it would be so much more potent.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Evelyn.
Thank you, Evelyn.
Any other thoughts, comments before I let you folks fellowship here and I sign out to get ready for worship? Okay. All right. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for joining us. And I will look forward to sharing Psalm 27 with you next week. And with that, have blessed worship. I will see you in a little while.